This week, we say goodbye to Tanya's all-wheel drive.
We're getting regular lug nuts.
That cat is still a little warm, so I'm trying to avoid.
We have the front CV axles out. This is the first step in becoming rear-wheel drive when you own a Subaru. So basically the way that this works is we are going to take, the car has three differentials, okay? You have a front open differential, a center open differential, and a rear open differential. And all other Subarus and models basically have a different version of those three differentials based on whether it's a WRX or an STI. This is a base model Impreza, so it has three open differentials, which actually makes it easier for us. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the tail shaft housing apart on the transmission, and that's what houses the center differential, and it basically just looks like the spider gears of an open differential. We're going to pull the center differential out, and we're going to preheat the actual cage that holds the center differential gears, and we are going to weld those gears so that there is no differentiating between the input and the output side of that, because that is what controls the power bias between the front differential and the rear differential. And so basically it'd be like having a lock differential on like an off-road vehicle. And then the next thing we do is we take apart the front CV axles. We can't just take the front CV axles out of the system because the wheel bearing on the front is dependent, actually all four wheel bearings are dependent on the spline and the torque on the CV axle to hold the wheel bearing itself together and actually give it its preload. So what we're going to do is we're going to take apart the front CV axle and just save this input or the output section that goes into the wheel bearing, and I'll probably chuck it up on the lathe and modify and part off the rest of this the bearing race that we don't need, so it's just not hanging out inside the car. And then we'll slide that spline in and bolt it in, and we will be rear-wheel drive converted. And then of course the very last thing that we'll do is we'll drop the rear differential of the car and weld it so that we have a locked rear diff and make it a lot easier for us to slide. It was enough to give us the relief on the press that we need to get it out of there.
There we go.
Voila!
So I just had to cut.
So yeah, if we just cut through one side of that, the ball retainer there, it gives us enough relief to be able to get it out. So that's the inside of the cup. So I'll probably just take this to my work and then part it off like right here so we don't have all that just hanging out. So not bad. So this is what's left of our CV axle. So yesterday we took the CV axle apart and just got this output end with the bearing cup. It did have the bearing cup on the end of it. I took this to work, chucked it up in the lathe, and then I parted off the bearing cup portion, then just faced off whatever I didn't need. So now we have a stub shaft basically with a spline so that we can bolt this back into the hub and hold the wheel bearing together. And then we also have this diameter right here, which is meant to ride into the dust seal for the wheel bearing to keep dirt and grit and stuff out of the wheel bearing. So we get to maintain that as well. So, and that is the first step in becoming rear wheel drive.
Wednesday? Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. That works pretty good.
That's much nicer than having a big old hunk of useless metal hanging out the back.
I know, and that's what they did with the other ones, and I was like, you know, it'd be super easy. I mean, it took me like 5 minutes to part that off. Like, it was just fucking, it's like, why not? I think we're done in the front here, so I can put the front wheel back on, huh?
Probably.
Yeah, I'll put the front wheels back on.
Okay. So it looks like I need 12. Oh, the light is keeping me warm. That's nice. Don't open your mouth while you're working under a car.
You need to
It's
get
never-
the surgical mask out again?
Yeah, never a good thing.
Sometimes. Whoa.
What are we doing?
Jack, and I will guide it. Oh. I just want to support the transmission while I pull the cross member, and then I think I'm just going to take the cross member apart and then put this piece, because it goes into like 3 pieces. And then I'm just going to bolt this piece back up just to lay the back of the transmission onto. While I'm working on it.
sensor hanging down right there?
Yeah, that's what that is. There, perfect. That's all we need.
Just touch it.
That's all we need. Okay, so inside this tail shaft housing right here is it houses the center differential, which goes into this housing here. So basically the back half of the Subaru transmission is devoted purely to the center differential. So once we pull this cover off, and you can actually do this job without pulling the transmission all the way out of the car. It's a little more cumbersome to do it, but we don't really want to pull the tranny. So we pull all the bolts in the tail shaft housing, and once I pop the tail shaft housing off, I should be able to just pull the center differential out from the inside. So we'll see how it goes. There it goes. I'm gonna let it drain for a little bit before I pull it. It's gonna make a mess.
Yeah.
That's a center diff.
That goes somewhere.
That looks broken.
Send it.
Huh. That looks broken. I don't really have an explanation for that. What we have here, this is our tail shaft housing. This is our intermediate shaft that goes into, wow, that bearing sounds terrible. Damn. Oh, that sounds horrible. That one sounds fine. This is our intermediate shaft that goes into our center differential. So if I were to just set this stuff back in here, these two helical gears are this is what actually drives the output. So this is our tail shaft housing. I've shoved the output shaft back into the tail shaft housing just to kind of show you guys what's going on here. Now I realize that I did that, I won't be able to get the center differential in. Anyway, so this is the intermediate shaft that drives on the inside of the center differential, and these two helical gears are actually what turn the output shaft of the motor to go to the rear differential. So basically what's going on here, we have our center differential, okay? And inside the center differential is a set of spider gears. It's just like an open rear differential basically with an open set of spider gears. There's no clutches on this. And it just distributes the torque bias between the front and the rear differential of the car. So that goes on there. Okay. And then our tail shaft would go out. And then this would basically, this is the input from the shifting output shaft on the gearbox portion. And then the inside spline down in the bottom there is what sends the power delivery to the front differential of the car. So basically you've got your whole, all your connections to both your front and rear differential. So the goal with this is we are going to actually take this differential apart here, and we are going to weld all those spider gears together just like you would to lock a rear differential. I talked to an engineer at my work and asked him about this problem that we got going on here trying to fuse the center differential, and basically he told me that even though a lot of people weld their center differentials, it's not necessarily a good idea because of the material it's made out of. Basically it's made out of like a powdered metal that's pressed together, and then it's all melted together and then heat treated afterward. And the problem with that is that your weld penetration into that is only surface deep, and it has the possibility from shock load, from like kicking the clutch or slamming a gear, to actually fracture the weld out of the whole penetration, and then we've got chunks of weld moving around in the transmission, which would not be a good thing. So I had another idea, was to take the viscous coupling on the center differential and actually drill and ream through all of the plates and pin the plates together to fuse the plates. So as long as we fuse the plates of the viscous coupling together, there's no way for the inner spline of the viscous coupling and the back gear to move independently from one another. And if we were to fracture those dowel pins somehow and it breaks apart, at that point we're only damaging the viscous coupler, and we're not ruining the spider gears that are in the center differential, so we could take it back apart and weld it later if this did fail without possibly damaging the transmission. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to indicate in this diameter. I'm going to drill with a carbide drill because it's a hardened surface, and then I'm going to ream through, and then we're going to press some dowel pins in to fuse all the plates, the inner and outer plates of the viscous coupling together. Okay, so I've indicated in the center bore here just kind of as a reference. I've already figured out my diameter that I want to drill to, and to figure out our bolt circle, I just kind of went online and found a typical bolt circle calculator. Basically, we're drilling 6 holes. The bolt circle diameter is 3" 125. Calculating our hole diameter already, and the first hole is angled 90 degrees so that the first hole starts in the X and not the Y. because basically I want to avoid this feature here. I'm not sure what this is in here, these little balls that are peened in, but I want to avoid it. I don't want to drill into that. So that's what I'm starting out with. So basically it gives me all my XY coordinates for all 6 holes. And if we go to those numbers, this calculator's already figured out the sine and cosine to calculate your XY positions based on the different angles. So. No way. That's it. Oh, cool. Look at that.
No, don't hit the volume button, you fuck.
Oh, shit. It's tight.
There it is.
Look at that. All right, now 5 more. Let's see if it goes. Fuck. Those, I think it's safe to say that these pins will never come out.
Now that the center diff is locked, we head over to the welding shop to take care of the rear diff. That's hot.
I was pussyfooting around. Alright, so we got the tail shaft assembly back together with the output shaft and the center differential on. I've cleaned up all these mating faces here and scraped all the old gasket material off and cleaned the mating surface underneath and on the transmission. And I'm just going to coat it with some gasket, some liquid gasket maker, and then slide this guy back in there and torque all the bolts down, and we're ready to put our transmission back together. Go. Good thing I lift weights. I don't. Oh, I see.
It didn't want to come out either.
No, it didn't.
There you go.
Okay. So the drive shaft is back in. We got the rear diff mounted up. It's all sealed up. Haven't filled it up with oil quite yet. Don't want to do that until we get our rear CV axles in. The transmission's all sealed up. I made some modifications to the shifter. Build this a little short shift throw reducer, and I also fixed the little clevis. The linkage that goes into the transmission was all blown out, so I machined some aluminum bushings for that, so that it's not sloppy, because I hate sloppy shifters. And then what else did we do? Oh, I made a shift knob for it. Super cool. And so now I've got the exhaust mounted up, and as soon as we get our hubs, the rear disc conversion hubs put on the car, we can go ahead and fill this thing up with oil and actually get it back on the ground. And that is how you rear wheel drive swap a Subaru.
Next week, we begin fabricating our hydraulic handbrake and dual rear caliper setup, and hopefully Tanya will be ready to slide.